World of Warcraft has over 26 playable races, each with thousands of years of history, wars, curses, and origins most players never bother to learn. So today, I'm breaking down every single one of them, starting with the most vanilla pick in the entire game: human. Humans are technically descended from the Vrykul, a giant warrior race created by the Titans roughly 15,000 years ago. Some Vrykul children started being born small and weak, and those runts eventually became, well, us, which is, not the most flattering origin story. For thousands of years, humans were just scattered tribes getting pushed around. Then the Arathi tribe unified everyone about 2,800 years before the First War, forming the nation of Erethdor. From there, humanity split into the kingdoms we know today, including Lord Aeron and Stormwind. Now Stormwind stands as humanity's strongest remaining nation. Despite being the most default race in the game, humans are the glue holding the alliance together. They've lost more than almost anyone, having watched both Stormwind and Lord Aeron fall to ruin. But if humans built their identity on loss and rebuilding, the next race built theirs by literally being carved from stone. Dwarf. Dwarves didn't always look like this. They used to be the earthen, literal stone constructs built by the Titan Keepers to shape the deep places of the world. Then the curse of flesh hit, and over thousands of years, living rock slowly became living tissue. Which is, not ideal if you liked being made of granite, but the real drama came later. The War of the Three Hammers split dwarven society into three rival clans: the Bronzebeard, the Wildhammer, and the Dark Iron. Centuries of grudges, civil war, and one very unfortunate summoning of a Fire Lord later, and you've got a fractured civilization that still hasn't fully patched things up. Despite all that chaos, the Bronzebeard dwarves carved Ironforge straight into a mountain and made it one of the Alliance's most fortified cities. And here's the thing, dwarves aren't just short guys who like beer, they're direct descendants of Titan creations. Every dwarf walking around Ironforge is basically a historical artifact with an axe. But if you think ancient origins make for a complicated identity, wait until you meet a race that's been around even longer. Night Elves. Night Elves have been walking Azeroth for over 10,000 years. Let that sink in. While humans were still figuring out how to not be Vrykul, the Kaldori had already built an empire, destroyed it, and started over. They evolved from the energies of the Well of Eternity, a massive lake of raw arcane power formed from Azeroth's own world soul. So naturally, Queen Ashara and her highborn thought, hey, let's open a portal in this thing for a giant demon lord. Sargeras convinced them it was a great idea. It was not a great idea. That portal kicked off the first Burning Legion invasion and shattered the entire continent. After the dust settled, Illidan Stormrage, because he literally cannot help himself, secretly created a second Well of Eternity at Mount Hyjal using vials from the original, which is, not ideal. But if ancient magical civilizations sound impressive, wait until you hear about a race that can't even keep their own city from irradiating itself. Gnome. Gnomes started as mechagnomes, Titan-forged constructs who got hit with the curse of flesh and slowly became the tiny, big-brained tinkerers we know today. They built Gnomerigan, an underground technological marvel carved deep into Danmara, engineering paradise. Then the Trogs showed up. High Tinker Gelbin Mekatorke, on some truly terrible advice, flooded the entire city with toxic radiation to kill the invaders. It killed the Trogs. It also killed nearly 80% of the gnomish population. The survivors who didn't die within days were twisted into leper gnomes, mindless and horrific, which is, not ideal. But here's what's genuinely impressive. Despite losing almost everything, gnomes just kept going. They provide the Alliance with weapons, vehicles, and an almost irritating level of optimism. You'd think a race that accidentally nuked itself would be a little more cautious, but no, they're already rebuilding. But if you think the gnomes had a rough landing on Azeroth, wait until you hear about a race that crash landed on it. Literally. Draenei The Draenei are literally space refugees, and somehow that's not even the wildest part of their story. These people live peacefully alongside the orcs on Draenor for roughly 200 years, right up until the Burning Legion corrupted their neighbors into a genocidal war machine. After that, decades of hiding on a dying world, which is, not ideal. When they finally escaped, they did it aboard the Exodar, a dimensional spaceship ripped from the Naru fortress Tempest Keep, in a fantasy game about swords and magic. The ship malfunctioned mid-flight and crash-landed on the Azure Mist Isles, turning their grand escape into a glorified controlled demolition. But instead of calling it a day, the Draenei heard the Alliance had fought the Burning Legion during the Third War and said, "We're in." Interstellar refugees who lost everything crash-landed on a strange world and immediately volunteered to fight someone else's war. That's either the most noble thing in Warcraft or the most insane. But if you think crashing a spaceship is a rough way to join a faction, wait until you hear how the Worgen got their invitation. Worgen, Gilneas built a giant wall to keep the world out. Worked great until the problem came from inside. The Worgen curse spread from Shadowfang Keep and tore through the entire kingdom, transforming almost every human in Gilneas into snarling, feral wolf creatures. King Gen Greymane, the guy who thought a wall would solve everything, watched his people become the very monsters he'd tried to lock out, which is, not ideal. The Night Elves eventually stepped in and helped the Gilneans recover their minds while keeping the beast, so now Worgen can shapeshift between human and wolf form, fully conscious in both. Fans originally loved them for their dark, gothic horror vibe, but Blizzard has slowly sanded those edges down over the years, which the community has opinions about. Strong opinions. But if cursed werewolves sound rough, wait until you meet elves who willingly let the void consume them. Void Elf. Void elves are what happens when you get kicked out of elf society for being too weird and then double down on it. These are blood elves who turned to void magic, a dark force that literally wants to devour all energy in existence, which is, not the safest career pivot. Through Illyria Windrunner's guidance, they learned to harness this power without being consumed by it and pledged loyalty to the Alliance following the Argus campaign. The Alliance recruited them alongside the Lightforged Draenei because apparently the strategy was get one group infused with holy light and another channeling reality-eating darkness. Balance. Here's the thing though, the community has never fully let go of the fact that Void Elves feel like a consolation prize for players who spent years asking for High Elves. Illyria Windrunner is a legendary character with decades of lore, and yet the race she represents sometimes feels like it was built in an afternoon. Edgy aesthetic, paper-thin development. Speaking of races forged through cosmic power, the Lightforged Draenei took the exact opposite approach. Lightforged Draenei. So you know how regular Draenei spent thousands of years running from the Burning Legion? Lightforged Draenei got tired of running and decided to punch back. The Army of the Light waged an endless war against the Legion throughout the Twisting Nether, and the Draenei most committed to that fight underwent a ritual infusing their bodies with the Holy Light itself, which is either deeply spiritual or deeply unsettling depending on how you feel about involuntary prophecy. After the Legion fell on Argus, these cosmic holy warriors needed a new hobby, so they pledged loyalty to Anduin Wrynn and started protecting Azeroth. One fun detail, Lightforged Draenei can have non-Lightforged children. The transformation isn't genetic. You survive a millennia-long holy war, glow like a golden chandelier, and your kid comes out completely normal. I don't know what to tell you. Now, the community criticism is that they're just regular Draenei with a tan, and honestly, not entirely unfair. The gold aesthetic is striking, but narratively they occupy almost identical space to their base race, their Draenei who glow more. But if you think glowing space goats are redundant, wait until you meet the dwarves who are literally on fire. Dark Iron Dwarf. Take everything you know about dwarves and set it on fire. Literally. The Dark Iron Dwarves came out of the War of the Three Hammers, a civil war that split dwarf society into 3 clans and basically ruined family dinners for centuries, while the Bronzebeards kept Ironforge and the Wildhammers went to the Highlands. The Dark Iron said, fine, we'll make our own kingdom, and built an entire civilization beneath Blackrock Mountain, complete with fire magic, magma manipulation, and a general vibe that screams, "We are not okay." For most of Warcraft history, these guys were straight up villains. Glowing eyes, a fondness for summoning fire elementals, not exactly Alliance recruitment poster material. But here's the thing, they eventually joined the Alliance anyway, which is one of the most significant political shifts in the entire franchise. Some players love the redemption angle, others think it happened way too fast for races that spent generations trying to kill each other, which is, a fair point. But if you think integrating former enemies is complicated, wait until you see what happens when an entire human kingdom shows up with a navy and an attitude problem. Cool Tyran. Every cool Tyran shares a bond with the sea. That's not flavor text. That's literally their entire identity. These aren't your standard Stormwind humans sitting behind castle walls. Cool Tyrans are built different, and I mean that physically. They're bigger, stockier, and wider than any other human variant in the game because generations of hauling ropes and fighting ocean storms will do that to a body. Their kingdom, Kul Tiras, commands one of the most powerful naval fleets on Azeroth. Legendary warships, far-reaching merchant vessels, the whole package. For a while, fear and political distrust cut them off from the Alliance entirely. But once those bonds were renewed, they brought that entire armada with them, which is, not a bad housewarming gift. They also finally gave players a human option that wasn't just Guy from Stormwind, which the community had been wanting for years. Recent patches even buffed their racial abilities to make them more mechanically competitive, so they're not just there for the aesthetic anymore. But if you thought Kul Tyrans pushed the boundaries of what a human could look like, wait until you see what the gnomes did to themselves. Mecha Gnome. About 400 years ago, a gnome called King Mechagon convinced a faction of his people that the future was mechanical. He led them to a mythical island vault built by Keeper Mimiron, and once they found it, Chief Architect Walton Cogfrenzy built Mechagon City around it and immediately started doing what gnomes do best, going way too far. They began replacing their flesh with steel and robotics, piece by piece, chasing the dream of full mechanization. Turns out, removing everything that makes you organic has some downsides. Who could have predicted that? So instead of going full Terminator, they settled on a balance between flesh and machine. Part gnome, part toaster. All heart. Eventually, they reconnected with their Gnome Regan cousins and now serve under King Gelbin Mechatorke with Prince Erasmin at his side as royal counselor. The cyberpunk aesthetic is genuinely cool, even if robot arms in a fantasy world raises a few questions about genre consistency. But honestly, in a world with spaceships and time travel, mechanical limbs are pretty tame. But if you thought gnomes with robot parts were a hard sell, wait until we talk about a race that literally invaded an entire planet. Orcs weren't always green. Before Gul'dan ruined everything, they had a complex shamanistic culture on Draenor built around survival, honor, and deep connection to the elements. Then, Gul'dan convinced the chieftains to drink the blood of Pit Lord Manaroth, and that was basically it for free will. The fell corruption enslaved them to the Burning Legion and turned their skin green, which is, not ideal. It took Thrall to pull them back, breaking the demonic hold and restoring their shamanistic heritage. But here's the thing, the green skin stayed. Even after liberation, even after redemption, they're still walking around wearing the evidence of what was done to them. Every orc in Orgrimmar is a living reminder that corruption leaves marks you can't scrub off. Some players love this arc. Others think Blizzard turned the orcs from terrifying warmongers into noble, misunderstood heroes a little too fast. Either way, few races in Warcraft carry that much narrative weight. But if you think carrying the scars of demonic corruption is rough, wait until you meet a race carrying the scars of death itself. Forsaken. The Forsaken are what happens when you kill an entire kingdom, and the victims get back up and say, "No thanks, we'd rather not be slaves." When the Death Knight Arthas Menethil tore through Lord Aeron, he didn't just destroy a nation, he turned its people into mindless, undead soldiers for the Scourge. But here's the thing, some of them woke up. These undead broke free from the Lich King's control, regained their minds, and immediately had to deal with the fact that they were still, dead. like rotting flesh, missing jaws, the whole package, and nobody wanted them, the living saw monsters, the Scourge saw deserters, so they built their own faction from the ground up. And while most Forsaken are undead humans, the roster is surprisingly diverse. Leper gnomes, wraiths, zombies, even orc skeletons all exist within their ranks. They're not a race in the traditional sense. They're a coalition of the formerly enslaved, united by shared trauma and the stubborn refusal to stop existing. The community still argues about whether the Forsaken are tragic heroes or ticking time bombs, and honestly, both readings work. But if the Forsaken are unsettling, wait until you meet the most peaceful race in the entire Horde. Tauren. Tauren are the heart of the Horde, and I mean that literally. Without them, the faction is just a bunch of angry green people arguing over who gets to hit things first. During the Third War, the Horde helped the Tauren drive the Centaur out of Mulgore, and in return, High Chieftain Cairn Bloodhoof pledged his people's loyalty and built Thunderbluff, a city perched on top of massive mesas, which is, you know, exactly the kind of thing you'd build if your entire culture revolved around being close to the sky. Tauren culture is rooted in shamanism, nature worship, and deep reverence for ancestor spirits. They don't just fight for the Horde, they fight for balance for the land. Even after Cairn was killed and his son Bane took over, the Tauren never wavered and the community respects them for it. Tauren are one of the few Horde races that fans consistently say got handled right. Their introduction transformed the Horde from an orcish war machine into an actual coalition of diverse peoples with shared values. But if the Tauren represent the Horde's spiritual backbone, the Trolls represent something far older and far more dangerous. Trolls were here first. Before the humans built their kingdoms, before the elves discovered magic, before almost anything worth talking about happened on Azeroth, Trolls were already running the place. Their dark troll ancestors established sprawling kingdoms that dominated the continent for millennia, making them one of the oldest civilizations in the entire Warcraft universe, which is, you know, not something most people think about when they see a lanky blue guy throwing axes in Warsong Gulch. Now, not all trolls are created equal. Forest trolls, for example, are absolute nightmares. They've been waging war against high elves for centuries, hold every other race in contempt, and generally make terrible neighbors. The Darkspear tribe, though, completely different story. These jungle trolls chose diplomacy over destruction, allied with Thrall during his exodus from Lordaeron, and became a core pillar of the Horde. That distinction matters. The Darkspear proved that thousands of years of primal power doesn't have to mean thousands of years of mindless aggression. But if you think the trolls have an impressive bloodline, wait until you meet the race that literally renamed itself after blood. Blood Elf. Blood elves are just high elves having the worst day of their lives and deciding to make it their entire personality. When Arthas and the Scourge rolled through Kelthalis, they didn't just kill most of the population, they corrupted the Sunwell, the single greatest source of arcane magic the elves had ever known. Imagine someone burning down your house, poisoning your water supply, and then leaving. The survivors renamed themselves Sindore, Children of the Blood, as a memorial to everyone they'd lost. Then they destroyed the corrupted Sunwell themselves because apparently losing it once wasn't painful enough. Without their magical source, Blood Elves started siphoning arcane energy directly from their surroundings like magical parasites, which is, you know, not ideal. Here's the thing though, the Sunwell eventually got purified, solving the whole addiction crisis, and that's where the community gets annoyed. Early Blood Elves were morally gray magic addicts clawing for survival. Now they're just pretty Horde elves. Their edge went to Void Elves, their arcane mastery went to Nightborn, and they got left with great hair and not much else. But if you think elves have complicated relationships with power, wait until you meet a race that turned capitalism into a superpower. Goblins started at the bottom, literally the bottom. They were slaves, forced to mine Kajamite ore beneath the Isle of Kazan by Zandalari trolls who had zero idea what that ore actually did. Turns out, Kajamite supercharged goblin intelligence over generations of exposure, so their captors accidentally created a race of tiny scheming geniuses, which is, you know, not ideal if you're the one holding the chains. Once free, goblins didn't sit around celebrating. They built ships, zeppelins, and sprawling trade networks across the South Seas. Kazan became a technological wonder, rivaling anything the gnomes ever bolted together. And goblins were famously neutral about all of it. They'd sell weapons to literally anyone with gold. Faction loyalty meant nothing compared to a profit margin. That neutrality ended when the Bilgewater cartel got shipwrecked alongside Horde forces thanks to the Alliance. Nothing builds a friendship quite like almost dying together on a beach. Goblins brought explosives to a sword fight and somehow made it work, but if goblins represent what happens when you give slaves genius-level intelligence and zero moral guardrails, the Nightborne show what happens when you lock geniuses behind a magical barrier for 10,000 years. Nightborne. The Nightborne are what happens when you lock a bunch of magic-obsessed elves in a city for 10,000 years and let them marinate. These are night elves from Suramar who helped close a demonic portal during the War of the Ancients. After that, Grand Magistrix Elisanda sealed the city off from the rest of the world. For 10 millennia. No visitors, no mail, no nothing. Here's where it gets interesting. The Nightwell, this massive arcane font they built during the war, slowly changed them. Over thousands of years of exposure, they shifted from standard night elf appearance into something distinctly different. Taller, more refined, darker in complexion. The magic literally reshaped their biology. And they consumed it through arc wine, which is exactly what it sounds like. The palace controlled the supply, rationing it to keep the population dependent. So basically, Elisande ran a 10,000-year-old authoritarian wine monopoly, which is, not ideal. The community still argues about their Horde allegiance. Some call it a betrayal of Night Elven heritage. Others point out that after 10,000 years of zero contact, calling them Night Elves is a stretch. But if you think magical transformation makes the Nightborne unique, wait until you see what a demigod's blessing did to a group of Tauren, High Mountain Tauren. Most Tauren you meet in World of Warcraft trace their roots back to Kalimdor. The High Mountain Tauren took a very different path. These are the descendants of Huln High Mountain, a legendary warrior who fought alongside the Night Elves during the War of the Ancients over 10,000 years ago, and for his service, the demigod Cenarius personally blessed his people, granting them the horns of Achero, which is why High Mountain Tauren have moose antlers instead of standard bull horns. That's not cosmetic, that's a divine mark from a demigod, which is, a pretty solid family heirloom. They split into 4 tribes over the millennia: High Mountain, Rivermane, Skyhorn, and Blood Totem, each carving out their own role on the Broken Isles. They're also noticeably larger than their Kalimdor cousins, a product of thousands of years evolving in total isolation on a mountain range. Everything was relatively stable until the Drogbar decided to steal the Hammer of Khazgorath, a Titan artifact that had basically held the 4 tribes together. Tribal unity shattered overnight, but the crisis actually forced the tribes to cooperate again, and that renewed bond eventually led them straight into the Horde. But if High Mountain Tauren represent what happens when orcs stay honorable in isolation, wait until you see what happens when orcs avoid corruption entirely. Maghar. Maghar literally translates to uncorrupted in Orcish, and that single word tells you everything. These are the orcs who never drank the demon blood, the ones who kept their brown and gray skin while everyone around them turned green and lost their minds. Here's how it happened. Before Gul'dan convinced the clans to chug Manaroth's blood like it was happy hour, a plague called the Red Pock swept through the orcs. A wise orc named Gaia quarantined the sick in a village called Garadar in Nagrand, and that quarantine meant to isolate the dying, accidentally save them from something far worse. They never got the chance to drink the fell blood. They just stayed brown, kept practicing shamanism, and watched from a distance as their entire civilization went insane. On the alternate Draenor, Garrosh Hellscream traveled back in time and warned the clans not to drink, so an entire timeline's worth of orcs remained uncorrupted, which is, a lovely gesture from the guy who war-crimed his way through Pandaria. Players love the Maghar because they represent a genuine what-if. What if the orcs had never been corrupted? The answer is a proud, shamanistic warrior culture built on honor. The brown skin isn't just cosmetic, it's a visual reminder of an entire civilization that could have been. But if you think the orcs have complicated ancestry, wait until you meet the trolls who built an empire before anyone else even existed. Zandalari troll. If every other troll tribe is a branch, the Zandalari are the trunk. These are the original trolls, the ones who looked at the rest of their species spreading across Azeroth and said, yeah, you guys go ahead, we'll stay here and build an actual civilization. And they weren't bluffing. While the Darkspear were scraping by on islands and the forest trolls were picking fights with elves, the Zandalari were constructing Zuldazar, massive golden pyramids, sprawling temples, dinosaur cavalry. These trolls figured out how to domesticate dinosaurs, and nobody talks about that enough. Their culture reflects thousands of years of unbroken refinement. Ancient rituals, Loa worship, elevated to a genuine theological system, and a ruling monarchy that commanded respect across the entire troll diaspora. The Zandalari weren't just trolls, they were the trolls. But then the Alliance showed up at Dazar Alor and killed King Rastakhan, which is, you know, not ideal. That single event pushed the Zandalari directly into the arms of the Horde. Losing your king to an enemy faction tends to simplify your diplomatic options pretty quickly, but if you think the Zandalari had a rough path into the Horde, wait until you meet the tiny fox people who got there by being enslaved in a desert. Vulpera. Vulpera are nomadic fox people living in the deserts of Vol'dun on Zandalar, and they might have the best origin to Horde pipeline of any allied race in the game. These little guys survived for generations by scavenging, trading, and running caravans across some of the most inhospitable terrain on Azeroth. Resourceful doesn't even begin to cover it, but their history isn't cute. The Sethrak Faithless Empire hunted and enslaved Vulpera for years, forcing them into labor and combat for a civilization that saw them as disposable. It wasn't until Horde adventurers showed up in Vol'dun and actually helped them fight back that the Vulpera got a real shot at freedom. Then the Alliance killed King Rastakhan during the Battle of Dazar Alor. Kiro, one of the Vulpera's most prominent figures, attended the funeral and made something very clear. The Vulpera would seek their own path. Not Zandalari subjects, not anybody's pets, their own path, and that path led straight to the Horde. What makes this work narratively is that the Vulpera didn't join out of desperation. They joined because the Horde offered something nobody else ever had: genuine freedom and self-determination. That's a stronger motivation than half the allied races got combined, but if the Vulpera chose a side, the next race we're covering refused to, at least not right away: Pandaren. The Pandaren started as a joke. Literally, they were an April Fool's gag that Blizzard ran with so hard they accidentally created one of the most unique races in MMO history. Before they were ever playable, Pandaren popped up as Easter eggs scattered across Warcraft games. Then Warcraft 3 made them neutral creep units. Then the Frozen Throne expansion added the Pandaren Brewmaster as a neutral hero. At that point, the joke had legs. Fast forward to BlizzCon 2011 and Blizzard announces Mists of Pandaria. The Pandaren officially become the first race in World of Warcraft history available to both the Horde and the Alliance. You play through the starting zone, see the world, and then you choose, like, Horde or Alliance, based entirely on what your character believes in. That's a massive deal. Every other race walks into their faction like it's a birthright. Pandaren earn theirs through conviction. They're beer brewing, kung fu fighting philosopher bears who went from a punchline to one of the most philosophically interesting additions the game has ever seen. Which is, you know, not a career path most April Fool's jokes get to have, but if Pandaren proved a neutral race could work, the next entry took that concept and strapped dragon wings to it. Drakthir Neltharion had a problem. The 5 dragonflights couldn't stop bickering long enough to deal with real threats, so he did what any reasonable Earth aspect would do. He built his own army from scratch. In a secret laboratory called Aberis, he combined the essence of all 5 dragonflights with mortal adaptability, creating soldiers who could wield fire, arcane, nature, and bronze magic simultaneously, which is, you know, not ideal if you're anyone who has to fight them. But here's the thing. The The Dracthyr weren't just magical powerhouses. They could shapeshift between a full draconic combat form and a humanoid visage, meaning they could tear you apart on the battlefield and walk into a diplomatic meeting 5 minutes later looking completely normal. Neltharion trained them on the Forbidden Reach, preparing them for war against the Primalists. Then the war went badly enough that he put every single Dracthyr into magical stasis. Not for a few years, for millennia. They slept through literally everything. The Sundering, the wars, the entire history of Azeroth. When the Primalists returned thousands of years later, the Dracthyr woke up to a world they didn't recognize. No orders, no Neltharion, just confused dragon soldiers blinking in the sunlight trying to figure out what century it is. Rather than serve a master who abandoned them, they chose self-determination, splitting between Alliance and Horde as the only race capable of channeling all 5 Dragonflight magics at once. But if ancient dragon soldiers sound impressive, wait until you meet the literal building blocks of the world itself. Earthen. The Earthen are what dwarves were before dwarves were dwarves. Let me explain. When the Titans were ordering Azeroth, they tasked their keepers with creating a race to maintain the deep subterranean regions of the world. The first attempt produced Trogs, which, if you've ever fought a Trog, you know that's basically the Titans going, yeah, no, let's try that again. Rather than destroy them, they just locked the Trogs underground and pretended it never happened. Relatable, honestly. The second attempt produced the Earthen, and these ones actually worked. Stony, durable, purpose-built custodians. Then the Curse of Flesh happened, and a massive chunk of the Earthen slowly transformed into mortal creatures. Those became dwarves, but not all of them changed. Sizable Earthen populations still exist in Deepholm, Uldaman, and Ulduar, continuing their original purpose like nothing happened. They've been maintaining the deep places for millennia while their fleshy descendants were up top discovering beer. Playing as Earthen is genuinely unprecedented. You're not the descendant, you're not the evolved version, you're the original Titan-forged blueprint, still made of stone, still connected to the Titan's legacy. Every other playable race has been shaped by mortality or corruption. The Earthen just kept doing their job, but if the Earthen represent Azeroth's ancient past preserved in stone, the next race represents something hidden even deeper and for far longer. Harenir. The Harenir have been hiding underground for tens of thousands of years. While every other race on this list was busy building empires and making a mess of things on the surface, the Harenir were beneath everyone's feet, silently guarding the roots of the world trees. Nobody knew they existed. Their home is Harendar, a jungle where the buildings aren't built, they're grown. The entire place glows with bioluminescent flora and fauna, and the roots of the world trees wind through everything. The Harenir watch over them with the kind of devotion you'd expect from a people whose entire civilization revolves around waiting for a goddess who left and never came back. Some Harenir got tired of waiting. These are the Shulka, monster hunters who sever their connection to the goddess entirely so they can focus on protecting Harandar from whatever nightmares crawl out of the dark, which is, you know, a career choice. Their racial ability, root walking, lets them teleport back to the cradle in Harandar from anywhere in the world. They also have tens of thousands of possible visual combinations, thorns, spines, fur, botanical features. Everything about them looks like it crawled out of a forest that's been evolving in the dark for millennia, because it has. After tens of thousands of years underground, the Harenir are finally stepping into the light. And honestly, they might be the most visually distinct race Blizzard has ever added. If you enjoyed this video and want to see more, click the video on the screen now.